Dr. Kim, what is financial abuse?
It's a great question. And as we begin to think about this, I would say, and this is kind of what I've gathered from some of the research I did, anything where you're controlling the victim, and I'm going to call the person who's being abused, because we're talking about abuse, a victim, controlling their ability to acquire, use, and maintain financial resources. And so I think it goes back to God wants us to be one in everything, and it's our finances. And if the one person is controlling that in the family and controlling that with the other person, then it can very easily fall in the category of abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think like some examples of this is purposely causing like financial instability so that your partner has to rely on you, and making them feel like, they can't live without you due to
Yeah.
finances. And so it really is, it's a manipulating thing of just like, I'm stripping you of your financial resources so that you won't be stable, so that you have to rely on me. Like that's not healthy. That's manipulative and abusive. And so, yeah, definitely. And then I think, it's interesting. I'm definitely not an expert on this, and you have a lot more experience counseling couples in this than I do. But when I was looking up like the technical terms for financial abuse, I guess I thought of financial abuse as some things that they're not claiming is financial abuse. And so when it comes to these things, I don't know if we can really nuance it as a technical term of financial abuse, but to me, it feels like financial abuse. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Dr. Kim. But like, for instance, I didn't see anything about like intense gambling, like
Mm.
gambling without your spouse's intent. Like that wasn't called financial abuse. And I feel like it is. And then investing large sums of money without talking to your spouse first, having a recurring theme of making huge purchases without talking to your spouse first, and then also not giving you access to certain money accounts and things like that. None of that was really like clearly always labeled as financial abuse, but I feel like it is.
Yeah, I think it obviously depends on how the spouse feels about it. But
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple where gambling ruined the marriage, and the person felt totally helpless because the person controlled the money and gambled really everything away. And so I definitely could see that as being abuse. I think all those examples could be considered abuse depending on the situation.
Yeah, and the consistency of the matter. So like, did it
Right.
happen one time? Maybe that's not abuse.
Right.
Maybe that's just like you were really stupid when you made and you really messed up and you're gonna ask for forgiveness. But if these are reoccurring themes and like openness and honestness isn't there, like I think these can become forms of financial abuse.
I think if you're telling your spouse, your wife, because it's from my experience, it's usually the guy that's the abuser in these situations. Now, you may think of a situation where, well, my experience has usually been the guy. So if you're telling your wife that she can't, I don't know, buy a new vacuum because it broke down for the house, and you pull up in the driveway with your new boat, to me, that's financial abuse. You're controlling the money. You're doing what you want with the money. You're minimizing what she wants or needs, or the family might need. And so it's certainly selfish, but it also then, how does your spouse feel when those kind of things happen? That they
Yeah.
don't count, they don't matter. You can do whatever you want, and it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and again, it's a controlling thing, right? So
Yeah.
it's like you get to have all the say in the finances and your spouse doesn't. How is that fair? You're supposed to be equal life partners. And so if you're operating in a form of manipulation and control, like that's kind of what abuse is. And so that for
Right.
you to control the finances and say, I get to buy a boat, you don't get a vacuum, you're demanding control.
Yeah, another example I think would be if, as a couple, that you make the decision that when you have children, that the wife is going to stay at home, and that the husband's going to work, he's going to be the breadwinner. You make that decision together, and all of a sudden, into that, the husband is controlling. He's making her feel like, if they have fights, he says, "You can't leave me because you don't have any money to leave me," and so he's using that. And to me, I think that's very abusive when you get into those situations. I've seen that happen a lot more times than a lot of times when I start thinking about it.
Absolutely. I have seen that happen in multiple marriages as well, of just like, and it starts off there, right? And the abuse tends to spread from there,
Right.
and get worse and maybe even becomes physically violent. But yeah, where it's like, you're manipulating the victim into thinking they can't live without you. They can't do anything. They don't have control of the situation
Yeah.
because
They're
you're the
stuck.
breadwinner. You have the finances, and we do live in a world that takes money to run. And so the victim in the situation feels no power, and their freedom is stripped
They feel
financially, and
fearful.
therefore their freedom overall is stripped.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that, and then it's like you're supposed to be. What does that do to the husband-wife relationship? All of a sudden, it's not a balanced, on the same level relationship. You're putting yourself way above your spouse. It almost becomes like a parent-child relationship instead of a husband-wife relationship.
Which is not the way it's designed to
That will
be.
never be healthy.
Hmm. Yeah. Got to repent of that. That's for sure. So let's talk about some practical examples. What are some ways you have seen financial abuse happen in marriage? Give us some practical examples of it.
I think a lot of it, I think the word control probably is a template you can put over most of these things. Something come to my mind, I remember a couple where, actually probably more than one couple, where they both made a good income. The one spouse, he made the wife quit her job because he wanted to be able to control all the money. He didn't want her to have her own money. And so that, and I've had it where they won't let their spouse work because they want to keep that control. If they have their own money, what are they going to do with it? Well, you know, so
Mm,
that's, to me, that's abusive. I think when money is restricted, if someone doesn't let you, I think you should have access to all the finances. And I've seen couples where uh, the wife doesn't know anything about the finances or where they are or what's in there. And so it's like, and when I bring it up in counseling, sometimes I get some real pushback. And yet I know that marriage is never going to be completely healthy unless there's trust both ways in that situation. And so doing that, not giving your spouse, maybe you have bank accounts or financial investments that your spouse doesn't have access to. That's a control thing, and I think that's not good. And then the other thing that I've seen quite a few times is where the spouse has to account for every penny they spend. And so I've had women that had to, if they're going to buy clothes for the kids, they've got to let their husband know. They're given an amount. And if they go over that amount, they have to call and get that okayed or pay for it when they get home. I mean, just by verbally being abused. And so that's not working together on that. And so I think all of those really fall under control. And
yeah.
and when you're controlled at those extents, I don't think there's any other word but abuse.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the next, we'll get into this a little bit deeper into the podcast about what financial abuse isn't. But when it comes to tracking every penny you spend, it's different if one spouse has to do it and the other one doesn't. So I think that's one of the key like differences here. So like Dylan and I account for every penny that we spend, but we both
Right.
do it. So it's
Right. Yeah,
different, and we're on the
absolutely.
same page, and we've both agreed to the budget. I have equal say in the budget, and we both track every penny we spend, and we both have freedom to make decisions within the budget that we both agreed upon. So it's
It's
different.
absolutely. If you're following Dave Ramsey, stuff like that, or
Yeah,
anything
you're going
like
to
that,
be tracking every
you're
penny.
going to be tracking every penny. No, and that's fine. But you don't, when you spend that
When
penny.
one spouse doesn't have a say, is not
Right.
okay.
When you spend that penny, you don't have to call Dylan and say, I'm spending a penny here
No,
and
it's in
have
the
him
budget.
yell at you and say, you can't spend the penny on that.
Mhm.
That's where the abuse comes in. No, I think
Absolutely.
anything that you do together and make the decision together, that's why it bothers me so much when the wife stays at home and they make that decision. We're going to live on this. We're going to be equals in this. And all of a sudden the husband becomes controlling in that.
Yeah, rips up control.
One thing that I did find I thought was really interesting. This was a study by the Center for Financial Security, said that 99% of domestic violent cases also involve financial abuse. 99%. So I think in that it's a lot more prevalent than I thought it was. And the other thing they said, financial abuse is often the first sign of dating violence and domestic abuse. So it's a big deal out there. And I think this opened my eyes to the enormity of the problem in our culture.
Yeah. And it makes sense to me. I mean, it's super sad, but it makes sense to me because we live in a world that it costs money to do things. It's the easiest way to strip someone's freedom is to take all of their money away and to not
Right.
give them access to money. And so, yeah, I think it's super sad. And I agree with you. I think when I think of the words that kind of like surround financial abuse or abuse of any kind, really is control and then concealing. So
Yeah.
control and secrets, basically. And so For instance, like some more practical examples of financial abuse. I knew a couple where they had everything separate and had a system for who paid what bills, but the husband wouldn't give the wife access to anything or tell her even how much money he made or how much money was in any given account of his at any given time. She had no access to his bank accounts. She had no idea how much money he made. And so he would always pay his half of the bills. But other than that, she had no
Wow.
information to his money and nothing was shared and it was all separate. And to me, that concealment and hiding, like it's not healthy for a marriage. And I would say that that errs on financial abuse. And how are you gonna have trust in your marriage in any other area if you don't have trust in this area that matters so much?
Yeah, I agree. It brings to mind a couple where that was definitely going on. And so I remember talking to the wife by herself, and she said, I don't have any idea what he makes, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you send tax returns every year. You see, you can look on that. And she just had this blank stare. She said, I've never signed a tax return. So he has been forging her name on tax returns their whole marriage. That's not good.
Yeah, and that's what this couple must have been doing too,
Yeah.
like unless they're
Yep.
filing separate.
Yeah.
And so it's really disheartening and really discouraging for anyone who's having to walk through that. So our heart goes out to anyone who is, and we'll talk more about what to do further
Right.
on in the podcast. Some other practical examples I've seen, serious gambling issues where, one spouse has no idea if they're even going to be able to pay their mortgage that month or pay their bills that
Yeah.
month because their spouse is going out and gambling thousands upon thousands of dollars. And so they don't even know if they're going to have money in their account or if their credit card's going to be maxed out or what, because the gambling is just so intense and all done without their consent.
Yeah.
I've
And then
also
all the
seen
stress falls on them. I mean,
absolutely,
and
which is
so
a
that's where the
fair.
abuse. I mean, this person going off doing what they want to do, and the spouse is the one who's sitting at home thinking, "Oh my gosh, how are we going to buy groceries? Where are we going to live?" All those kind of
Yeah.
things.
And living with all that instability and
Yes.
insecurity is just like mind blowing. And so another thing that I've seen is like using your assets for personal benefit without asking, taking money or using credit cards without permission, ruining credit history of the other person by running up
Mm,
their name and not paying the bills. Something that I've seen in one marriage is like they did all the poor credit history stuff, like all the like dumb mistakes they made. It's like it's almost like they purposely did it in one of the spouse's name, like the offending spouse did it in the victim's name always on purpose. And so it's like even if they were to get divorced, this poor spouse's credit history was ruined because it was manipulative. It was intentional what they were doing to like keep their credit fine but destroy the spouse's,
yeah.
which is just really dangerous. I think claiming to make payments or bills in your name, but not following through. So I have seen this when couples, if one couple decides to stay home, it can be hard, if your job history is gone, it can be hard to get a job. But even worse than that, if you're making all the payments and everything's in that one spouse's name who works, you have no credit history.
Right.
And so I've seen sometimes in the past where one spouse who is staying home and doesn't have as much like the job history anymore. If you don't, they've kind of decided like, oh, but let's put some stuff in my name so I still have credit history. But then the spouse doesn't follow through and doesn't do that. And so now you have no
Yeah.
credit history either, which again is just you're stripping them of freedom financially and ability to do things if you were to split.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in fact, something we became aware of, not because we're controlling, but something we didn't even think of. And a CPA, a long time ago, like said, Nancy didn't have a credit history.
Yeah.
And because she wanted everything everything's my name, so we began to put things in her name, keep it balanced, those kind of things. So it's important for a wife for a lot of reasons, not because you're going to leave, but you need a credit history that
Hmm.
is good, and then in case if you ever do need that.
Yeah.
But what if
Certainly your
you had
spouse could pass away.
absolutely, and if you hadn't worked, don't have a credit history, it's going to be you're just going to have to face some things you shouldn't have to face.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And then one thing I saw that I haven't seen in real life, but I saw online in researching this was, I guess sometimes couples will threaten or lie, threaten to lie to officials to say that they are cheating or misusing benefits. So like basically like tattling on their spouse. Like if if you leave me, I'm gonna tell the authorities that you lied on our insurance form or that you lied on this or that you lied on that. So again, it's manipulating. It's manipulative and it's trying to gain control of your spouse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Dr. Kim, most couples struggle with money to some extent. So, let's talk about what financial abuse is not. What I would hate for people to do is to listen to this podcast and for everyone to assume they're being financially abused, because hopefully that's not the case.
No, I think the key to me is the two words agree together. So if you sit down and make a budget together and you're both decide we're going to be accountable to this budget and we're going to put an amount in here that each one of us can spend and we're going to hold to that and we're going to hold each other accountable. That's not financial abuse. And especially if you've been in a, maybe in a, your credit's not good or you've been in a, just working out of debt. And so you're doing these things to get out of debt so you can have more freedom later on. It's not an abuse when you set priorities together about what you're going to spend on. One of the things that Nancy and I really did good early in marriage, we made a list of the things that we wanted for our home, and we ranked them 1 to 10. And then when extra money came, we already knew how we were going to spend it. We'd agreed on it. My boat never made it. And
Yeah, never made the list.
my TV was on there, but it wasn't number one, and that was okay because we needed a place to sit before we had a TV. So we needed to go in that order. But we agreed, so that wouldn't be because we agreed ahead of time what we were going to do. So I think the whole thing in handling finances, God wants us to be responsible, but He wants us to do that together. Now did that mean that Nancy and I sat down and I wrote part of the check and she wrote that back when we used to write checks? No, it meant that I usually did the bills online and then she would see what we did and where we are and what we had. She's always had access to every financial thing that we have. And so we've always done those together. All of those things like that are not financial abuse. Those are things of really being financial responsibility with what God's given you to manage.
Yeah, that's really good. I love that. And I love that list idea. I think that's just like a good thing to implement for all couples is, you are saving, everyone's on a budget. It all looks different, but everyone's on a budget. And so go ahead and get on the same page. That way, when you do have money or you do save up things, you're not arguing then with the money about what to do. You already have a
Right.
plan and action. You're being proactive of having a list of things that you want. So, and I've been meaning to ask you, Dr. Kim, can I throw some things on your list for our house? Because we're
Sure.
young and we got 2 young kids, and I figured your list might be complete by now. I can give you some things to add to your list for my house.
It was, yeah. I mean, now it was, yeah. No, Nancy seems to always have a list.
It doesn't go away.
But some of them were, like when the house we bought, our second house from after Grant was born, was a bigger house, and there were 3 rooms that had nothing in them. I mean, nothing in them at all. And so that's where the priorities went. What do we need for those rooms? One was going to be eventually Julie's room. Well, we left it. It didn't have anything in it. And then, but we knew before she was born, we wanted to do some things. So those things were a higher priority. So we kind of make that. And yeah, well, what are you on the list?
I love that.
Awesome.
I'll send it to you. I'll email it. Nancy will put it on there for me. She's great. I think some other things that financial abuse isn't, like you said, it's doing things together. So if your spouse wants to be involved in financial decision making, that's not financial abuse. You should both be involved in financial decision making. It's not your money or his money. It's your money together. It's our money, and so you should be operating like that. And then I think it's also not. When your spouse is really tight with money and maybe needs to be nicer to you about asking budget questions. I think a lot of couples struggle with that, and that's not necessarily financial abuse, but it is a problem that should be addressed. So if you're in that situation where your spouse is just a little tighter with money and maybe not being kind to you about the budget, maybe not being kind about their questions, or just being snarky in any way, or naggy in any way, then that issue should be addressed, but it's not necessarily financial abuse. I think most people are in this situation, right? Most couples, there's one person who's a little bit tighter about the budget and maybe a little bit stressed and maybe they're not operating as kind as they could be about that. I think if you're in that position, if you're struggling with that, I would really highly recommend you check out our Unity Building Journal. It's a great resource, and it has a whole section on money to help you get on the same page and really ask great, deep, integral, detailed questions about your money to get on the same page and to learn how to talk about money in a way that's fruitful and good for your marriage and kind and loving. And so check out that resource if you're in this boat today.
Yeah, that's really good. One of the things that in premarital that we talk about in the SIMBUS report, which I love using with premarital couples, and when we talk about finances, it asks them questions to identify, are they a spender or a saver? Most of the time, the couples are different. And it seems like, so then how do you deal with that? Okay, you're more of a spender, saver. How do we come together with that? I've had couples where they're both savers, and, helping them see it is okay to spend a little money. The problem is that they're both spenders. It's like, oh man, we're headed for disaster. Sometimes you can get a rain on this kind of thing. But I think to know that about each other, another place where if you're trying to understand each other in any or financially, the Enneagram is a great place as you more understand each other more, because you're going to come from some different places in these. And it's not a right or wrong, it's different. It's learning to embrace those differences, value those differences, because you're going to be stronger and better before it.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the Enneagram has helped us talk about financial stuff better. Dylan is an 8, which is a challenger, and they think really quickly, and they usually are very smart, which Dylan is very smart.
Yeah.
And so he'll make decisions about our money like really quickly sometimes and say, "Hey, I think we should do this." And to me, it feels like, "Whoa, like you didn't ask my opinion, like slow down." Like it makes me feel that valued. But knowing that about him helps me understand it's not that he doesn't care about my opinion. He does want me to share his opinion, but he's a fast thinker and he makes fast decisions. And so he can go ahead and tell me what he thinks, but then I get to say, "Oh, but I have thoughts on that too."
Yes.
And so it is helpful
That's good.
understanding each other's personalities.
Absolutely. It can really eliminate a lot of problems.
Absolutely. It's good. So, Dr. Kim, how does financial abuse usually end up happening in a marriage? Does it grow over time or are abusers kind of consistent from the start?
I think it grows over time. I mean, I think if someone was that way and you're in a dating relationship, at least would have red flags before you went into it. I think usually what I see is the abuser, for whatever reason, feels like they got to control. They test the water a little bit. Sometimes it come off as I'm trying to protect you or something like that. And then once they're married, it changes. One of the things that story that a long time ago, a lady told me she had dated this guy. He was the guy of her dreams. From the reception to the hotel they were staying, he changed. He told her how he was going to control money, what was going to be like, what she could do, what she couldn't do. This was on the way to the honeymoon night, which I don't think ended up great. But so I think yeah, and I think sometimes I've seen it where a spouse kind of messes up financially, and then the spouse uses that as an excuse to take control instead of saying, "Hey, let's go to a financial class together. Let's learn about this together, so you can learn. I'm sure there's some things I can learn together, so we can get on the same page." And so, but if you don't do that, then they punish them. Going to punish you because you can't handle money, so you can't have a checkbook, you can't have credit cards. This is back when people use checkbooks, credit
Mhm.
cards. You can't have a debit card. You can't have any of those kind of things. And so I think those things kind of evolve. I think the tendencies to control are probably there, and probably some of that's in all of us. Honestly, it's how we handle that. And so then they almost find the excuse to take control of finances. And I get it for a lot of reasons. Some people have really bad history with finances. Some people have been in a relationship before where maybe the person really took advantage of them financially. But all those things, if you're in a marriage, have to be worked through so you can be healthy with this marriage.
Yeah, that is so good. Absolutely. I agree. I think it often starts off really slow and then it grows and it's kind of like and that's the hard thing about the tricky thing about abuse is it does kind of happen slow over time and the abuser usually makes it seem like it's your fault
Hmm.
or makes you feel like their behavior is normal and your behavior is crazy, so you're the crazy one. And so I think a good thing to do if you feel like this might be happening in your marriage is to talk to a trusted friend, explain what's happening. A good friend is going to be able to tell you like, "Hey, no, that seems off. That's not what we do
Yes.
in my marriage. I'm concerned for you." Sometimes a friend can see things that you can't because it has slowly happened over time. And again, most abusers are going to make you feel like it's your fault and you're the
Yep.
crazy one because that's the thing about abusers is they are very manipulative. Whether
Yes.
they mean to be or not, that is the case of all abusers.
Yep. They're masters at gaslighting, turning
Hmm.
things around. And yeah, I see it all the time in that. And I think
Yeah.
because it happens gradually, a lot of times you aren't as aware of it. And that's why I think, what do you do if you think you're in that situation? What you said is right. I mean, I think you want someone that can objectively look at that situation for you and say, because, so what's they'll do with the frog? You throw it in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you put it in and it just gradually gets to boil, they're going to stay in there. So you don't realize at some time how drastic the changes have been because it's happened a little bit at a time.
Yeah,
You just know something's
definitely.
wrong.
Yeah, and you're not foolish or dumb or there's nothing wrong with you
Right.
if that's where you're at today because this has happened slowly over time and they they're the ones who are the offender in the situation. So you don't need to take on any blame for what has happened. This isn't your fault. So that leads us to a really great question, Dr. Kim. What should someone do if they feel like they're listening to this and their eyes are open? Maybe they're weeping in their car right now and they're scared. What do they do if they think that they are being financially abused in their marriage?
turn to God first and pray. Ask for God's wisdom. Ask Him for to bring someone in your life that you can trust and talk about, because what we just talked about, I think it's really important. And I think, if you haven't talked to your spouse about it yet, talk to them about it. See what they respond. If your spouse responds in a good way or says, okay, let's go to counseling or whatever, that's great. That's what you want. But if they don't, then I think it's time to talk to someone else, and then probably go to a counselor and lay that before them and let them help you make a plan, not a plan for divorce, but a plan to help you get out of an abusive situation and what steps need to be taken to do that. You can't let it
Yeah.
go on.
Definitely. And I think if you're nervous or have any hint of a feeling that your spouse might become violent when you address
Yeah.
it, because that's the thing about abusers is, it usually it continues to spread and it goes further. So if you think for even a second that your spouse might become violent with you, I would say get safe. There are a lot of great organizations out there. I know here in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's an organization called Interact, and it is a nationwide organization, but it helps people in domestic abuse situations of all kind, including financial abuse. And so you might want to go to a place like that and do some research and talk to someone before you approach your spouse about this, if you are worried that they're going to get physically violent, because if that's the case, you need to go about this really cautiously and safely and in a public place, where you're safe before you talk to them if you think they might get violent.
No, I think that's a great point. And it goes back to that stat I gave earlier of 99% of domestic violence cases also involve financial abuse. So chances are it could get violent. And so you got to
Mhm.
protect yourself. You got to protect your kids. And so when I said talk to them, I mean, that is, if you can talk to your spouse and the fear of violence is not there, then sure, talk to your spouse. But if you feel like it's going to go bad, you got to protect yourself.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think, if you don't think they're going to get violent, hopefully that conversation will go well. Maybe they'll really see what they're doing wrong. Maybe they don't even realize it, what they're doing. Maybe they're not really meaning to be as controlling as they are, and they're not meaning to be manipulative. But I think, going to God first. I love what you said, Dr. Kim. I think very first you go to God, then you go to a trusted friend, and then you kind of assess the situation of, do I need to go see a counselor or a domestic violence professional first before talking to my spouse? And talking to a trusted friend or pastor, and also maybe even just doing a little bit of research online would help you make that decision of like, does spouse come next or does counselor come next?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think, when you said that too, when you're thinking it through, look at your spouse's dad. How did he handle finances? If he was real controlling with finances, that was your husband's model. And so it may be bringing that to light. He can see it. So a lot of it depends on who they are and what level of trust do you have with your spouse that you can talk to them about things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So can a couple overcome financial abuse and reconcile and change things for the better?
Sure.
Hmm.
But the abuser's got to admit there's a problem. If your abuser does not admit there's a problem, it's not going to change. It's just not
Yeah.
going to stay in that pattern. So I think for the victim has to learn to speak up for themselves, have to set some boundaries and see how their spouse is going to respond to that. Because the goal is to, I think if it's going to be okay and reconcile, there's got to admission of a problem, understanding God's plan for oneness in our finances, and then what are our next steps to get there, whether it
Yeah.
involves counseling, financial advisor, whatever it is that it's going to take us to get there.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think the abuser has to be repentant, which is
Yeah.
just a churchy word that means to turn from their sin, admit that they've done wrong, and commit to change. And then I think with the victim or the non-offending spouse, they have to be willing to enforce those boundaries. So they have to be willing to enforce the consequences of the boundaries when they are crossed. And I definitely think that you shouldn't be doing this alone. I think if you're trying to recover from financial abuse in your marriage, I definitely think it will require a licensed Christian counselor to help mediate and reconcile a case like this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think, too, one thing to look for, there's a difference in saying you're wrong, admitting you're wrong, and then, and not changing. If I can say, and if Nancy caught me at something, I can say, oh, I'm sorry about that. Well, probably I'm saying I'm sorry I got caught. I'm sorry, but I'm not saying I'm gonna do something about it and change. And you want to know that your spouse not only sees that what they did was not good and not healthy for their marriage or for them, but they're willing to do whatever it takes to change.
Yeah, that is so good, Dr. Kim. Is it okay to separate from someone for financial abuse as a
Sure.
Christian?
Sure. I
Yeah.
think just like with any abuse, and I think it's hard for us sometimes with the things that are emotional abuse. I mean, I've seen people in emotional abuse that just really the stress of it causes physiological problems. I mean, I've seen people with headaches. I've seen people develop all kinds of things, hives, the shingles, stuff like that from it. And so, yes. Now, does that mean divorce? No, but you've got to get some. You need to get away so you can begin to look clear at it and look at it from what it really is, because you've been in the middle of it, and a lot of times it's hard to see that objectively when you are. um, the key is the abuse has to stop, and by
Hmm.
separation you can see what is your spouse willing to do, and are they, and not just say, having them say, oh yeah, I'll change. No, you need to see them, what steps are they taking, what help are they willing to get, what are they willing to do. And then if that happens, then you can work on it together, and then hopefully eventually reconcile and have a great marriage. But you've got to protect yourself, and you know, most, it's going to involve protecting your kids too.
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. And this is, your future that you're talking about, your kids' future and, financial stability. I mean, it's a basic need,
Yep.
food, clothing, a house over your heads. Those are basic needs. And so if they're not being met or if they're being threatened, it is a huge problem. And
Right.
so I think it is okay to separate for financial abuse. I think again, a professional counselor is going to be needed for this and will help you determine if that is necessary or not. I don't necessarily think it's always the first step.
Right.
Like I don't think separation is the first step for most people, unless you don't feel safe, in which case absolutely it is the first step. But in most cases, I don't think it's the first step. I think it's talking to a Christian counselor first, who is going to help you assess, who has assessed many situations like this. Like you, Dr. Kim, as a professional licensed counselor, can look at a marriage and say if you think that the victim spouse needs to leave or not, because you've seen enough cases of it. You've seen the red flags.
Right.
You've dealt with it enough to know if that they need to get out now and separate, or if well, let's do some counseling, let's see how like you'll be able to discern the abuser's repentance too a little bit, because you've seen it time and time again.
Yeah, and I think I think trust that, and I think knowing that a counselor can probably see things that you don't see. And so if you're going to go to a counselor, I think with prayer, you follow your counselor's lead, because, you know, I've had people that say, well, I really think they can change. And it takes them going through another month of hell, basically, to get to that point. And some people need to do that. I get that. Is that the best for them? I don't think so, but I understand when somebody has to get there. Um, but yes, getting yourself out of an abusive situation. And if, like we are saying, if you don't feel like you can even bring this up and talk to your spouse without it going violent or potential violence, you need to separate to even deal with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I just can't underestimate the necessity for a licensed counselor, because I agree with you, Dr. Kim. I think you're going to be able to see the counselor's going to be able to say some things that you can't see because
Right.
they have dealt with this before. They're trained in this. And so and they'll be able to help you see how severe the problem is and what a good next step for you is. And obviously in this situation, we're talking about physical separation. We're not talking about instantly getting divorced. We're not
Right.
talking about dating other people. But I will say that financial abuse is an extra tricky situation when it comes to separation, because if you're legally married, the financial stress might still be your issue, as long as they're refusing to be repentant. And so that legal divorce might need to come sooner. And that's where I just don't feel equipped to answer that question. I think if you're in this situation, should be talking to a licensed professional Christian counselor and also a lawyer who is a Christian,
Right.
to learn how to protect yourself financially, because legally when you're married, the finances are usually joint. And so what does that mean for your future? What does that mean for protection for your kids if you have kids? All of those things.
No, I think that's really good. I'm glad you brought up the attorney, because a lot of times I'll tell someone, go to the attorney. You're not going to file for divorce. You're going to get information, and where you can lay out everything before them, where what you know about finances, and let them give you some guidance of how to protect yourself in this situation. So you just need information. And I think that's where a lot of women in these situations get stuck or don't do anything. Their fear overcomes everything. They've been controlled, and they just need information. Realize there is a way out, and there's a way to at least put it in front of your spouse in a way that they have the opportunity to change.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's what you need to do.
Yeah. You need information, and there is always a way out.
Yep.
If someone is making you feel like there's no way out, that is a huge red flag that it is abusive and that you need to get help right away. There's always a way out, even if it's you leaving with a shirt on your back and running to a friend's house, because there is an open door, especially if you're running to your church. Someone in that church is going to have an open door. I would welcome anyone who's being abused in any way, shape,
Right.
or form to come stay in our little 3-bedroom house with us. Come on.
Yeah. And I think, your spouse might be telling, well, nobody would take you, nobody wants you, and nobody else would have you but me.
Yes, they
Things like
will.
that. Those are all lies.
All
There
lies.
are
Yeah.
so many people, like you said, the organization, Raleigh, there are organizations everywhere to help women in this situation because unfortunately it's a big problem in our culture.
Yeah, definitely. So do some research, get some help, reach
Yeah.
out. Definitely. So, Dr. Kim, if someone is listening to this podcast today and they feel like they are guilty of financial abuse to some extent, what should their next step be?
Well, I hope if they are guilty, they've listened to the whole podcast, and because the tendency would be to have turned it off a long time ago with this issue. I think hopefully that would encourage them to really look at themselves and say, okay, I do have a problem. And most of them know they have a problem somewhere in there. They can't think this is right unless they had it modeled their whole life and that's all they know. Pray, go to your spouse, sincerely apologize and tell them what you're going to do, and and then follow through with those things and get the help you need. Just begin to make a step.
Yeah, that is so good, Dr. Kim. I think that it's so important to remember that there is nothing too dark or too bad for God's grace, His love, and His mercy, even abuse. So there is grace for you. Admitting your sin and talking to God is the first thing that you need to do. And then, like you said, confessing to your spouse and then getting counseling. Like we can't stress it enough. A situation like this is going to need some professional Christian counseling. It is worth it and it is necessary in order to move towards reconciliation.
Yeah, and then if your spouse makes that move, then I know you've been hurt and everything, but if they're seeking God and they're seeking to change, I think then your role becomes one of coming alongside them, of loving them, of forgiving them, and speaking into them as they begin that journey, because it's going to be a hard journey for
Yeah,
them. and
absolutely.
and that's the whole deal. That's where you go things together. So that's what you look for. And what I tell people all the time when they're in situations like this, look at your spouse's heart. If you see Jesus, then you know that's sincere. If you
Yeah.
don't, then you know they're playing a game with you.
Yeah, that is
Manipulators are really
good.
good at lying.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that is so good, Dr. Kim. Well, this has been a good conversation. It's been a hard topic. It is
Yeah.
not one that's fun to talk about, but like you said, it's one that a lot of people are struggling with. And so we are prayerful that this will be a light to many people and that if anyone is in this situation, they will seek the help that they need and restoration and reconciliation will come. Let it be so, Jesus. Do you have any final piece of thoughts
Well,
for our
it has been a tough subject, and I think we've probably touched some nerves with some people. And I would say this: there's always hope. God's always got an answer, uh, and God's going to provide your way out, whatever that is. And so trust Him and surround yourself with people that can give you information and support you and love you and help you through that process. But you don't have to continue to be a victim.
Yeah, that's good. Well, next week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the cold shoulder in marriage. We'll be sharing about what it is and how to handle it if it's happening in your marriage. So be sure to come back for that conversation next week. As always, if you need anything, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at info@awesomemarriage.com or message us on ooh, on Instagram.
This-
I will try that again. Uh, well, hey, as always, we love hearing from you. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can email us at info@awesomemarriage.com or message us on Instagram. We love praying for you and we love hearing from you. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.